June of 1940, a German four-engine aircraft climbs out of a Luftwaffe base in occupied France on a clear morning. Below, the Atlantic stretches empty and cold. The plane is graceful, almost delicate. It was designed to carry wealthy passengers across the ocean in comfort, not to hunt merchant ships at the edge of the world. But today, itis hunting. Its nose is packed with bombs, its wings heavy with ammunition. Within weeks, this aircraft type will kill more Allied sailors than any surface warship. Within months, Prime Minister Winston Churchill will speak its name with a kind of reluctant respect. He will call it the Scourge of the Atlantic. This is the story of the 4200 Condor. It began as a dream. It ended as a nightmare. In 1937, a German aircraft designer named Kurt Tank was asked a simple question: can you build a land plane that can fly across the Atlantic? At that time, nobody did. Every airline used flying boats, seaplanes that could land on the ocean if something went wrong. A land plane that tried to cross the Atlantic and suffered engine failure would simply fall into the sea. The idea seemed impossible. Tank thought otherwise. He had just designed a fighter that would become one of the war's best pursuits. His name was already known, so he took the challenge. Working for the Lufthansa airline, Tank and his team at Focke-Wulf sketched out something radical. They would build the first land plane ever to make a regular passenger route across the Atlantic. No flying boat, no backup escape route. End quote. Just 4 big engines, light construction, and the hope that nothing would break. The aircraft that emerged was called the Condor. A prototype made its test flight on the 27th of July, 1937. Kurt Tank himself flew it. 3 days later, that same aircraft made a non-stop flight from Berlin to New York, 48 hours, over 4,000 miles. No refueling. It was hailed as a marvel of engineering. Newspapers called it proof of German technical brilliance. Lufthansa painted them in sleek silver and offered them to wealthy passengers who wanted to cross the ocean in style. The Condor became the elite transport of the age. It carried diplomats, business leaders, and celebrities. It was the first land plane to touch down in North America on a regular schedule. Then, the war changed everything. The 2nd of September, 1939. Britain and Germany are at war. Lufthansa's Condors, still in civilian service, are seized by the Luftwaffe. The sleek transports are stripped of their luxury. Passenger seats are torn out, windows are covered, bomb racks are welded to the wings. 400-pounder bombs, mines, and anti-ship ordnance are loaded into the prow belly. Machine guns are bolted to the fuselage. In a matter of weeks, the most elegant airliner ever built becomes a predator. The first maritime patrol took place in August of 1940. A Condor flew from its base in France out into the Bay of Biscay, looking for British merchant convoys. The crew spotted nothing that first day, but the precedent was set. The Luftwaffe had found a new use for the aircraft. It had unprecedented range, over 2,000 nautical miles. It could loiter over the first Atlantic for hours, searching. It could relay convoy positions back to German U-boats waiting underwater. It could attack. It was the perfect weapon for the Battle of the Atlantic. June of 1940. France falls. German bases are now on the Atlantic coast. Condors begin operations in earnest. They fly in 1s and 2s, hunting the great convoys that keep Britain alive. These are the lifelines of the island nation. Tens of thousands of tons of food, oil, ammunition, and steel cross the Atlantic every month. Without these ships, Britain starves. Without them, the war is already lost. The German strategy was simple. Find the convoy, report its position, let the U-boats move in for the kill. But the Condor could do more than scout. It could attack directly, flying at dangerously low altitude, 50 feet above the waves. It would drop 3 bombs from a pattern that bracketed the target ship. From that height, it was almost impossible to miss. The technique was crude, but it worked. The risk was enormous. Enemy fighters, if they appeared, could cut the slow Condor from the sky. Anti-aircraft fire from escort ships could tear it apart. Bhutan, those early months, the Allies had no good answer. No fighter could reach that far out. No. Unquote. Escort vessel came with adequate defenses. The summer of 1940 was catastrophic. Condor squadrons, numbering only 24 aircraft at their peak, sank ship after ship. Records became grim statistics. Between June and February of the following year, the Condors claimed over 300,000 tons, shipping destroyed or damaged. In some weeks, that amounted to nearly all the sinkings in the Atlantic. U-boats got credit for many of these kills, but the truth was grimmer. The Condor was the true merchant killer. Shipping companies dreaded the call. A Condor's been spotted. Merchant crews knew what that meant. Lookouts scanned the horizon. Gun crews tensed. There was nowhere to hide. The Condor could come out of the sun, out of cloud, without warning. When the bombs fell, men died, in fire and freezing water. It was during this period, in the darkest months of the Battle of the Atlantic, that something remarkable happened. Winston Churchill, the Prime Minister of Britain, did something he almost never did. He singled out one specific aircraft type as a special threat. He called it the Scourge of the Atlantic. The phrase was deliberate. It was meant to convey something unique. Not just a weapon, but a nightmare. A plane feared so much that it earned an epithet usually, reserved for the devil himself. Why did Churchill do this? The answer lies in what the Condor represented. It was not the most numerous threat. It was not the most heavily armed. U-boats sank far more tonnage. But Condor was visible. It was hunted by every Allied merchant captain. It became symbolic of the air war over the sea. And it was, for a time, unstoppable. October of 1940. The Condors are now based in France at Bordeaux-Mérignac. They fly longer patrols. They hunt farther into the Atlantic. Luftwaffe crews develop tactics. 1. Condor will shadow a convoy, staying just out of range of the escort's guns, reporting every maneuver back to the wolf pack waiting below. The U-boats move in on the signal. Surface. Ships are sunk while they burn. The Condor circles above, watching. Sometimes it drops its own bombs to speed the carnage. But the Condor had a secret flaw. No one knew it yet. The aircraft had been designed for comfortable, long-range flying. The fuselage was graceful, light, built to specifications that made sense for a luxury transport. It was not built for the stresses of low-level bombing runs. It was not built for combat. And it was about to begin to break. The first structural failures began in late 1940. Condors would return from patrol with cracks in the fuselage. Stressed by the abuse of combat maneuvers, the airframe would fail. Crews reported that the aircraft could simply snap, not in combat, in landing. The fuselage, but immediately behind the wing, would fracture from the strain. At least 8 Condors were lost. This way, graceful, elegant aircraft would come home from a successful patrol and literally break their backs on the landing approach. The Luftwaffe tried to address the problem. They reinforced the structure. They changed the loading procedures. They screamed at crews to be gentler with the aircraft. But fundamental truth could not be hidden. The Condor was a luxury transport, not a warship. It was being asked to do something it was never meant to do. And yet, it kept fighting. Into 1941, the Condors continued their patrols. The threat was well enough known that British and American intelligence gave it special attention. Escort carriers began to appear with Allied convoys. Single-engine fighters, launched from crude catapults, would climb to meet the Condors. The first time this happened, a German crew was shocked to see a fighter at extreme range over the Atlantic. That fighter, powered by a single engine and a desperate pilot, drove the Condor away. The idea that a merchant convoy could fight back had never entered German planning. By the middle of 1941, the tide was turning. More escort vessels, more defensive armaments, more fighter cover. The Condor was becoming vulnerable. It was no longer an invincible predator. And the Luftwaffe knew it. In July of 1941, German High Command issued new orders. Condor crews were told to stop attacking shipping directly. They were told to avoid combat. They were to focus on reconnaissance only, finding convoys, reporting positions, letting the U-boats do the killing. The decision was admission of defeat. The Condor's brief reign as the apex predator of the Atlantic was ending. It had lasted barely 18 months. Bhutan, that time, it had become famous across 2 continents. What made the Condor so terrifying, despite its limited numbers, was something subtle. It represented the fusion of long-range air power with commerce raiding. Before the war, nobody had imagined that an aircraft could hunt merchant shipping across the open ocean. The idea had seemed too difficult, the distances too great, the logistics too complex. The Condor proved everyone wrong. It also proved something else. It proved that a weapon does not need to sink the most tonnage to be strategically significant. The Condor never came close to matching the U-boat's total. Bhutan was the visible threat. Every merchant captain saw it. Every convoy commander feared it. It became, in the public imagination, the symbol of German power over the Atlantic. The aircraft that Kurt Tank designed in 1937 as a commercial marvel had become an instrument of war. Its graceful fuselage, built for beauty and comfort, was pressed into a violent role for which it was not designed. It succeeded for a time, but it failed in the end. The Condor was a compromise. It was too fragile for combat, but strong enough to kill. Too slow to escape, but fast enough to find. Too precious to lose, but used recklessly anyway. By 1942, the Condor had been relegated to secondary roles. Some were converted to pure transport. Some carried long-range radar. Some were sent to the Eastern Front to hunt Soviet shipping on frozen lakes. But the Atlantic hunting was over. In its place came better aircraft, more numerous, more heavily armed. The Condor's moment had passed. Production ended in 1944. 276 aircraft were built in total. Most were destroyed in the war. A few found their way to Spanish hands after being damaged over the Atlantic. Spain, officially neutral but sympathetic to Germany, interned. At least one Condor survived the war. It was captured by the Allies and studied, analyzed, reverse-engineered. And then it was forgotten. Today, if you visit an aircraft museum, you might see a Condor, or you might not. Most are gone. But the legacy remains. The Condor proved that the rules of naval warfare had changed. Distance no longer guaranteed safety. A merchant convoy in the middle of the Atlantic could be found, tracked, and attacked from the air. This lesson would echo through the rest of the war. It would shape the way navies fought for decades after. And it all began with one aircraft type that earned a title from the most powerful man in Britain. Churchill did not give his epithet lightly. He called the Tirpitz the Beast. He called the Beast Bismarck, the most powerful warship in the world. But the Condor earned something rarer. It earned a name that suggested not just danger, but inevitability. A scourge is something that cannot be stopped. Itis, inescapable. Itis, punishment itself. That, a prime minister would use such language for a single aircraft type tells you everything about what those merchant captains, those convoy crews, felt when they looked up and saw 4 engines crossing the horizon. The FW-200 Condor remains one of history's most elegant failures. It was built for peace, but used for war. It was designed for comfort, but became an instrument of death. It was meant to carry the elite across an ocean, and instead, it hunted the ordinary sailors who kept world alive during its darkest hours. And for one brief, terrible season, it succeeded. It became the plane that no captain wanted to see, the shadow that no escort could fully drive away, the reminder that in total war, there is nowhere far enough to be safe. Now, you might be wondering, if the Condor was so dangerous, why didn't the Allies build something like it? The answer reveals something about how wars are won. The Condor was a 10-compromise aircraft. It was fast enough, but not fast enough. It was strong enough, but not strong enough. It was a design that worked brilliantly for its intended purpose, carrying passengers across the Atlantic, and adequately for its unintended purpose, hunting ships. But once the Allies understood the threat, they could optimize for defense. Stronger escorts, better fighters, more ships to replace the losses. The Condor could not adapt. It was already being asked to do something its designers never intended. Asking it to do more was like asking a surgeon's scalpel to serve as a sword. And that's the final irony. The Condor was made obsolete not by a better aircraft, but by better tactics, better coordination, and better willingness to pay the price of convoy warfare. Churchill's name for it, the Scourge of the Atlantic, was accurate, but all scourges fade. All threats, no matter how real, are eventually contained. The Condor had its season. It earned its epithet. And then it was gone. By the time you are watching this, fewer than 600 people on Earth have ever seen a real FW-200 Condor in person, the aircraft that once embodied German technological prowess. The plane that inspired fear in the greatest naval power on Earth has become a ghost, a name, a memory, a single chapter in the story of a long war. But that chapter mattered. It taught the world an unforgettable lesson. In the modern age, no. Merchant ship is truly safe, no matter how far from land it sails. That lesson, written by the Condor in the blood of merchant sailors across the Atlantic, has never been forgotten. Do you think Churchill would have given the Condor that name if he could have foreseen how quickly it would become a relic? Or did he understand, even then, that all weapons, no matter how terrible, are temporary? Let me know in the comments below. Hit like if you think the Condor deserves to be remembered, so YouTube shows this to more people who are fascinated by the forgotten machines of World War II. Next time, we'll meet the aircraft that made the Condor look like an antique, the Arado R-234, the world's first operational jet bomber. A plane so far ahead of its time that Allied engineers spent months trying to understand how it was even possible. Subscribe so you don't miss it. Thanks for watching.